Hello, we meet again. So I wanted to make a quick video to do a kind of demo and commentary on what you will be doing on Thursday, which basically amounts to an exercise and reverse outlining. Now, reverse outlining is a practice that you can apply to your own writing in the process of revision as you approach something like a final product. Or you can also apply it to a text into which you're trying to do a deeper dive. And so on Thursday, the exercise that you'll be doing will be applying the practice of reverse outlining to a text, specifically the excerpt from Frederick Douglass's narrative that is commonly titled Learning to Read and Write. But for this demo, for the sake of this demo, I'll be doing it for the first 7 paragraphs of Nikole Hannah-Jones's introduction to the 1619 Project, with which we are all familiar now, I believe. So basically, for this activity, you and 2 partners will have to first identify what you think the main theme, the main argument, the main kind of message of Frederick Douglass's text is. It's a little bit tricky in this case because it's more of it's kind of a memoir. It's not a self-contained essay, and it's a fragment of a significantly longer piece. Nonetheless, there is a certain unified message that you can extract from it that kind of binds the piece together. And it's more than just kind of what's on the surface. He's telling the story of him learning to read and write for kind of specific reasons. Really, kind of more than one, but you can extract one unifying, organizing principle of this piece. But to give you an example of what this will look like, I will be doing it for Nikole Hannah-Jones's 1619 Project, and it's kind of 3 steps. So, all right, so the first thing you'll do is lay out the main idea, and I'll show you all this in a minute, what this will look like. The main idea of the piece as a whole. Then you'll go through each paragraph and say in just a few words the main topic of each paragraph, and then you're going to see how that paragraph builds upon the overarching argument or the overarching idea of the text. And you want to do all this in as few words as possible, right? Because it's about exploring and analyzing the shape of the text, the balance of the text, and how the different parts are kind of organized around each other and working together, building upon each other. So if you're doing this for your own text, for your own writing, for a paper or something that you might be working on, you know, it's a useful practice for revision. Let's say you go through it and see that you're spending, you know, 4/5 on the thing on exposition and description, and just a tiny little bit on analysis. Then a reverse outline can help you see that. You can see the imbalance, and you can go back in, maybe see where you can cut down on the description, maybe add in a bit more analysis. Or even if the parts are equal, even if you've mounted equal space to the different elements, you might see, for example, that you want to go back and mix it up a little bit more. So infuse the analysis into the description itself. So it's just a way to see that everything is balanced and works well together, and that it is all working together evenly, coherently, and cohesively towards the common goal that is determined by your thesis. All right, so now I will show you specifically what it will look like, the activity that you will be doing on Thursday. So again, for the purposes of this demo, I am doing the 1619 Project, but you will be doing the fragment from Frederick Douglass's narrative that is often called learning to read and write. And they're very different texts, really. So, this one is more of an essay, even though it incorporates some elements of personal narrative. It's more of an essay organized around a pretty clear thesis. And Frederick Douglass's is more of a personal memoir with a thesis infused into it. But there is an organizing principle still. There is an argument that he's making in it, which is really important to try to extract. And hopefully you will do that with your groups. And we'll explore his text a bit more. So just so you can see how this works, you're going to have your text, and then in a weekly folder, you'll have a document that looks sort of like this that you can edit, hopefully. So again, the first thing you want to do is state the overall main idea, the thesis, the organizing principle of the text as a whole. So for Nikole Hannah-Jones's introduction to the 1619 Project, I have made this statement. The main argument of Nikole Hannah-Jones's introduction to the 1619 Project is that the history of slavery and its lasting repercussions are not just part of American history, but are in fact at the very center of American history and inextricably connected to all of its major chapters, from the country's founding through today. Furthermore, crucial to her argument is the distinction between America as an ideology and America as a material reality. Right? So there's a lot of different ways that you could sort of state her thesis, her organizing principle, her main argument. But this is the way that I have stated it, and you can see that if I was analyzing the text in order to write a paper about it, by restating her thesis in a certain way, I myself would be building towards my own argument. There's elements in this that could be phrased differently, that could restate her thesis differently, and an argument could arise out of that. And wherever an argument can arise, a thesis can arise. So you can see you'll have 3 columns, one labeled paragraphs, one labeled main topic of paragraph, and one labeled how the paragraph advances and or builds upon overall idea, argument of the text. So ideally, you'd have the text right in front of you, and you could just write these things in the margins. So main topic, how the paragraph advances the main idea of the text. But that just seemed far too complicated to do as a group activity in Blackboard. So instead, I've created these little tables for you. And this is how it's going to work. So you're going to go through it paragraph by paragraph. And there will be I'm going to count the paragraphs in Douglass's piece, and there will be 1 row for every paragraph in his piece. But I'm just doing the first 7 paragraphs of the 1619 Project here. So to revisit the first paragraph, it goes like this. My dad always flew an American flag in our front yard. The blue paint on our 2-story house was perennially chipping. The fence, or the rail by the stairs, or the front door existed in a perpetual state of disrepair. But that flag always flew pristine. Our corner lot, which had been redlined by the federal government, was along the river that divided the black side from the white side of our Iowa town. At the edge of our lawn, high on an aluminum pole, soared the flag, which my dad would replace as soon as it showed the slightest tatter. So I'm doing this by myself, but you'll be discussing this with your 2 group mates. And you'll basically, the first thing you want to do is figure out what is the main topic of this paragraph. Well, I decided that the main topic of this paragraph was Hannah-Jones describes dilapidated house in contrast to dad's pristine flag flying, right? So it's pretty surface. This is no kind of deep analysis. I'm just trying to state in as few words as possible the topic, the subject, the surface content of the paragraph. Ideally, you can do this in like 10 to 15 words. Sometimes that's really hard and you have to go a bit over to be clear. But ideally, like even 5 words, 5, 10, 15 words. If you could even say it in 1 word, great. Oh, and you want to make clear that which paragraph this is. So this is for paragraph 1. And then I have to think about how does the paragraph advance and or build upon the overall idea, argument of the text. So I've already read the whole text, of course. This isn't something that I think you would do or that would be very useful for you to do for a text as you read it for the first time. You'd want to read the whole text first. You already have an idea, a general idea of the main shape of the thing. This is just to do a deeper dive, a deeper analytical dive into the shape and the spaces between the interconnecting parts. So you'd want to read the whole thing first, which of course I already have. And so I can say with some confidence that I think the paragraph advances and or builds upon the overall idea, argument of the text, in that it introduces a perspective, it invites emotional involvement, and it sets up the conflict between American symbols and history. So this first paragraph is really sort of setting up the framework from which the argument, from which the thesis is growing. It's setting forth this kind of disparity between the ideology of America and the actual historical reality of America. So it hasn't made an argument yet, but it's setting up something. It's creating a space in which an argument can arise. So I've done my first paragraph, and then I'm going to do my second paragraph, paragraph 2. I'm going to look at it again. Again, I've already read this, so I'm looking at it bit by bit now. So again, I'm going to evaluate with my kids. What is the main topic of this paragraph? And I determined that it is the setting of Hannah Jones's dad's youth in apartheid Mississippi, and Grandmama's realization in Iowa realizing racial segregation was widespread even in mythical Promised Land. So this one, I'm pushing the limits of how long this should be, but especially because of this language of this word mythical Promised Land, which is taken directly from the text, that seemed really important to me, right? So it seemed important to me in the sense that if I was doing this reverse outline to approach writing a paper, creating an argument about Hannah Jones's text, this specific language really has a lot to do with this. And so I didn't want to leave that out. And so that puts me up to like 21 words, which is a bit much. That's pushing it. But for the clarity of my thought and my organizing, if I was going to be doing this in preparation to write a paper, this is how, for me, I would want to write it, to refer back to this paragraph if need be, and to understand how it relates to the other bits that I'm going to be putting down here. And I'd want to think about how this paragraph advances and or builds upon the overall idea or main argument of the text. And so I came up with that it suggests a connection to the past and the ubiquity of racial inequalities through time in American geography. So that's really important, right? If this is her main idea, then part of establishing that this is a valid argument is establishing that, in fact, the repercussions of slavery are widespread. They're not localized, right? It's not just something that happens in the South, but it's something that happens throughout the whole geography of America, the country as a whole, but also the whole past of America. And each part, this helps me understand how each part is building on each and talking to each. And then I'm going to go through one after the other. For the sake of time, I will employ a little digital magic and just fill in all the squares at once. Right, and so just like that, you can see how it's done. You'll notice that I'm not really using complete sentences. I'm not really worried about getting my grammar too correct here. I'm really only concerned with getting enough words down to represent the thought, right? It's not fancy. It's just enough to represent the thought of the paragraph as I interpret it. So over here, the main topic of the paragraph, this is purely surface. For the most part, you really shouldn't put anything here that isn't really explicit in the text. This part might involve a bit more analysis. And if I were to keep going, if two of us were to do this, very different things could arise over here, more so than over here. Over here, the only differences should be in how it's worded. Whereas over here, differences in interpretation might begin to arise, if that makes sense. This is purely surface, and this is explanatory. This is explaining how the text is operating, how each paragraph is operating, and kind of why. But only on a very bare bones level. Only, these are just indicators of deeper thought, without actually being the fully formed deeper thought. Because the main point of this is to explore how the different parts interact with each other. So rather than thoroughly dissecting each separate part, it's more about exploring the connections between those parts, the dynamics between those parts. So sort of the interactions in the space between. And this is a really effective way of doing that because you're seeing each part kind of from the outside as a whole unto itself that is interacting with all these other bits, these other, you could say like cellular bits perhaps, or the biology inclined among us. Each part is kind of its own little piece that's interacting with all these other little pieces to form a dynamic whole. All right, so that little demo that I just created, I will be putting that in the weekly folder for you to examine a bit closely. And if you want to, which I would recommend, is even just going through, rereading those first 7 paragraphs of the 1619 project and looking at how I've extracted those thoughts. Also in the weekly folder, I will be including written instructions for what you'll be doing on Thursday, and a document with a table like the one I just made that corresponds in number of rows to Frederick Douglass's Learning to Read and Write, which I really hope you enjoyed if you haven't read it before. And even if you have read it before, I hope that you got something new out of it this time. And with that, I will say good night, good morning, or good afternoon, whenever you might happen to be watching.